Good morning. This is Father Mike Spalla from Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in lovely Alaska. We're going to talk about moral judgment in war, epistemological commitments of the American way of war, and we're going to answer some of the how and what of what one can know about moral judgment in war. So to start us off this morning, let me just orient you to how just one particular service component, the U.S. Army, sees moral judgment in war. So you have essentially three columns as you're looking at this slide, and on the left-hand side, one must understand fundamentally that the Army leader, that officer, that non-commissioned officer, is essentially part of a character-based organization and part of something called a, quote, profession. Within that profession, there is a certification process, there's a screening process, there's expertise that makes them able to make refined moral judgments in war. This is important in answering the how question of epistemology because they're using their minds, their reason, their will, they're using their senses. So whether you're Kantian and you think those are synthetic judgments, or you're an Aristotelian and you think abstraction is going on, or you're purely looking at this from a naturalist perspective, this idea of the professional is very significant. Now, in the middle column of the screen, you're seeing a cutout directly from a piece of Army doctrine. We use things called field manuals and Army regulations, but what you're looking at is entitled "Foundations of the Army Ethic." Now, the Army ethic is all the values, beliefs, laws in our nation that speak to the how and what of our moral judgments. It's honestly very clear for us, and what I'm going to show you in this presentation is that comes from the traditional epistemological school. On the right-hand side is the lowest level, user level expectations of every soldier in the U.S. Army. These I present to you are moral facts that can be known and actioned, and that is the expectation every day, every hour in the Army. Now, whether those things are executed perfectly is another matter, but that's ethics. War is defined as a human endeavor. It is a contest of wills. It's for reasons, for a political purpose. This is not only the way the West and the way the United States defines war, but this is actually based off of Karl von Clausewitz's definition of war. Clausewitz is very integral to our doctrine. Why is this important for our talk today? Well, epistemologically undergirding this is the who. The people we're talking about are professionals who are using their minds, their reasons, their wills, their emotions, and based on their expertise and their special authority, they are unpacking the instances which need to have moral judgment applied to them. What I propose is that the American and really most of the Western schools in terms of military judgment is going to best be categorized under a traditional foundationalist moral epistemology school. And as it pertains to the leaders, the people making the judgment, I believe they're capacitarians, and I'll explain that more in a moment. What epistemological conditions underlie moral judgment in war? So there's two schools. There's a traditional school and a non-traditional school. Let me just discuss the traditional school briefly. So the traditional school has both foundationalist and non-foundationalist. A foundationalist is someone, and I kind of put up just a layman's term definition here. You need at least some unshakable, certain, infallible, self-evident knowledge. I'm not saying this is a lot of knowledge, but you need some knowledge. This would include the groups moral sense theories, so you could think Hume here. It also includes our moral intuitionists. You could think rationalists like Descartes, but also our classical theories. And I could have, better unpacked this by saying, of course, this is Aristotle, this is Aquinas, this is Augustine here for these. This is W.D. Ross, famous translator of Aristotle. Don't mind the F-35 in the background, by the way. So when you're thinking of that moral intuitionist, you're probably thinking of a lot of our character-based leaders in the U.S. Army, and this is partly why, just based on how we do our doctrine, I'd say we're in that foundational school. But that is not the only school. Or not the only part of the traditional school. For the non-foundationalist, there's also something called coherentism, which is very popular. And basically that school is saying all knowledge is inferentially justified. So you may not have like one particular truth by itself that is unshakable and certain in and of itself, but you would have a group of beliefs which are justified together. And this is the view of Jeffrey Sarah McCord, who actually writes in moral epistemology. It's the view of John Rawls as well. There are some assumptions of the traditional school of moral epistemology which are important. I'll just want to talk about a couple of the epistemic assumptions here. So the first one I'll mention is the necessity of justified belief. It's not apparent in philosophy that if one knows something, one necessarily is justified to believe it. But a traditional school is just making that assumption prima facie. The other thing is I'll pick out is the priority of epistemic structure. So there's something called the regress problem of justification, where if you justify one belief on the basis of another belief, well, what is that belief justified by? And you can just kick the can down and down and down the road. A traditional school is saying, well, there are these basic beliefs that are just justified as they are. There is nothing behind them that needs to be justified. It's just necessary. The non-traditional school has several groups which can be packaged together within it. I'm just going to talk about the reliabilist and the non-cognitivist for a moment, though. So reliabilism is more about the process of attaining moral truth rather than individual moral truths. They might say, hey, it's too difficult to gain the truth, but if our process is generally good, then we are justified in what we believe. One challenge to this, though, is that we're in an enterprise about moral truth, and if this is merely about processes, are we talking about morals necessarily if we're doing this? For a non-cognitivist, probably the most popular is someone called A.J. Ayer. And I love what he says, in his particular view. He talks about, there's no moral beliefs. He talks about, quote, special exclamation marks when you're talking about a moral topic. And I think this would be a great example of a philosophical topic that maybe is positive, when you're sitting fireside talking about moral judgment in war, but from my experience as soldiers, and then of course just as we're reflecting on what is the doctrine of the U.S. Army, there's no non-cognitivist in Army doctrine, or as far as our Western tradition in actual military practice. People definitely act as if they're acting upon moral facts. Now, whether they do it well or they do it right is, of course, another question. So let's talk about our leaders for a moment. What are some of their epistemic conditions which underlie their judgment? So there's at least 3 different ways we could go with this. I'm just going to talk about just internalism and capacitarianism, though. Our internalists say you need to know that what you're doing is wrong. And I may have oversimplified this, but an internalist would say, as it comes to making a judgment in war, hey, ignorance is bliss. If you didn't know that you weren't supposed to do that, then, you're not culpable. There are weak and strong forms there. There are reasoning procedures that might be factored into a weak internalist. But the challenge to this position is it seems like you should have known. There's lots of situations where, and I'll give the example, you're a pilot, you didn't follow the checklist for the startup of your aircraft, and then, you blow out an engine and now you're in trouble. You're a commander who is on the battlefield and your staff advises you that a particular piece of terrain is key and that you must hold it in order to have an operational advantage, and you don't, and you suffer undue casualties. You're a mortarman and you have a misfire because you were not listening acutely to the coordinates that were spoken multiple times. All of these would be examples where by our doctrine and by our policy and by our practice in the U.S. Army, we really don't function as eternalists. We function as capacitarians. If you could have known, you are a moral agent and you can be culpable. You should at least have the capacity for awareness. If you didn't even have the capacity, if it was nowhere in the policy, if it was like if the pilot didn't have it anywhere on the checklist and it was completely novel error, they would give you some leeway, but generally ignorance is not bliss. I would say that all of those things that we can readily notice are just facets of moral realism. So again, it comes under that traditional school, but those things are human dignity, winning, but also there's an expectation in the West that we at least try to win the right way. There's the reasons we tell our people and our service members to fight. These are not they are sometimes very emotional, but are often include fighting for freedom, fighting for justice, virtue-centered explanations here. There is an expectation that one will fight for a, quote, good reason in general. And our doctrine reflects this as well. So the challenge to the traditional school on all of this, as you and I are all reasoning through this, is, okay, but we don't always value these things. Does this imply that we don't or can't know these things for certain? And I have to point out that both epistemology and ethics, in this case moral realism, is about normative things. This was a point by Peter Trammell from USMA. As I looked at his article, it's not about what is actually happening. So we're prescribing what is. We're not describing what is. That would be the field of history or field of science to describe the world as it is, not what it should be like. So one final thought here. The evidence of shame, grief, and mental health that is evidenced not only from American soldiers, but from soldiers that fight in any war, I think actually are very tangible evidence and consequences of when we deny moral facts in this world. What if one were to adopt a non-traditional moral epistemology, i.e., deny the possibility of knowing or judging by moral truths? The consequence of this would be denying human dignity as a way of making judgment in war. This would be very difficult for the American school to do and for the American people and by our military doctrine. Additionally, how we conceive of war as an human endeavor and involving human reasoning for an end would be very difficult for us. It would hearken to Clausewitz's war by algebra, and it's just not mere calculation for us. Now, an argument in favor of this would be the incredible emotional responses we sometimes have as Western audiences in waging war, and you could even think of A.J. Ayer's position here. The challenge to this, though, would be that that type of untethered violence has unintended consequences. Think revolution, internal collapse, and insurgencies. So what can we know about moral judgment in war? Because Americans are generally part of the traditional school, part of the foundational school, believe in moral facts, our senses and our reason are going to recognize virtue, rules, and we may disagree on what exactly normative theory it is, but we're going to recognize those things, and indeed our military doctrine reflects this. I would say most importantly, though, for the individual is the character-based formation of the individual leader who has to confront these current issues that we're facing in ethics, as we see with drone warfare, targeting within population centers, just cause for war, and our ongoing insurgencies and terrorism in the world. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and look forward to the rest of the class in logic and epistemology. Thank you.